This is a purely transactional operation. It's about access to oil in the economy. And if he can make a deal with the existing Venezuelan government, Maduro's vice president, that's the direction he's going to go.
The former Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, is in New York ahead of his court hearing. He's due in court round about 5 o'clock our time. You'll hear coverage of that with John Pinar here on Times Radio. He is facing narco-terrorism charges after his capture by the US over the weekend. Sir Keir Starmer is so far refusing to say if he believes that President Trump's actions break international law. The Chinese are demanding that the US release Maduro. Well, Julia Buxton is Professor of Law and Justice Studies at Liverpool John Moores University. Professor Buxton, good afternoon to you. First of all, what could a British Prime Minister say in these highly unusual circumstances?
Well, we'd be hoping for some very strong language from Keir Starmer, really. I mean, this is in the UK neighbourhood. This impacts the Caribbean region, Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana, which is right next door to Venezuela. So it's really quite extraordinary. Also, the UK holds over £1 billion worth of Venezuelan gold. We have a very important vested interest and a voice in US action in Venezuela. And it's very, very disappointing that we've not had this expressed by Keir Starmer.
All right, let's have a listen to exactly what he said. He was asked a question by Sky's Beth Rigby about whether President Trump had violated international law. This is what he said.
Well, international law is really important. It's the framework, and it's for the US to set out its justifications for the actions that it's taken. But it is a complicated situation. It remains a complicated situation.
So you're not going to say whether you think
the most important thing is stability and that peaceful transition to democracy. That's what matters to Venezuela above all else.
Yes, I mean, I think you'd have to say that's somewhat mealy-mouthed, Professor. What do you say to that?
Oh, yeah, it's completely unacceptable and quite disappointing that a human rights lawyer, the best that they can suggest is that perhaps this is a violation of international law. I understand that the UK government is waiting for the Trump administration to present its justification for this invasion. Trump's been very careful not to present this as being actual war or a direct conflict with Venezuela. They're using the mechanism of charging Maduro, as you know, with narco-terrorism charges. But the reality is that Trump is as less convinced of the importance of convincing the US Congress of the legitimacy of these actions than he is Keir Starmer. So we're really not going to get this declaration from the US. So I'm quite unsure what Starmer's waiting for.
Yeah, I mean, not everybody's on the fence. Emily Thornberry, a Labour MP, and she's chair, isn't she, of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. She says she doesn't think it's legal. So she's absolutely come out and said that.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, it's not a difficult question in terms of the violation of the territory.
Oh, no, that's annoying. I think we might have lost Julia Buxton. Have we lost her?
Territorial integrity of Venezuela under Article 2 of the law. Sorry.
Go on.
Shall I carry on?
Yes, if you don't mind, Julia. Apologies.
Yes. Yeah, sorry. I mean, it's obviously a violation of the United Nations Charter, Article 2, the territorial integrity of Venezuela. If the US is going to, suggest that it's perfectly legitimate to intervene and arrest the president in this way, then rightfully it's been suggested the US should be charged with kidnapping unless it can clearly demonstrate that there is a legal basis for its intervention. But I don't think necessarily we should get wrapped up also in a lot of these debates and arguments about whether this is a legal intervention. The reality is it's a disastrous intervention for the United States, and we are really going to see this unravel, I think, over the next few days.
Right. Well, you say disastrous. The people of Venezuela, on the whole, generalisation alert, appear to be glad to see the back of him. Isn't that significant?
Oh, of course it is. It's not a case of, these things can't all be the same at the same time. You can be appalled by the way Nicolas Maduro has acted, but also deeply concerned at the manner of this US intervention. And essentially what the US has done, and it's quite remarkable from Trump, really, is that it's completely bypassed any regime change effort. Maria Corina Machado was the leader of the opposition. It was expected that she would be kind of leveraged into the presidency by Trump and by the US. But she's been completely bypassed because Trump has decided that he doesn't want boots on the ground in Venezuela. So what he's left Venezuelans with is this kind of decapitated regime, which is all still intact. They still control the army, the police, the state economy, the bureaucracy, the Congress, regional government. So this has been a very, very problematic intervention, and we're really in this kind of limbo right now, which is of no benefit to Venezuelans at all.
Right. I mean, you say the whole situation is going to unravel in the next couple of days, I think was what you said. How will that look?
Well, the problem right now is that, Venezuela has not been able to bring imports into the country. It doesn't have access to its oil economy. We've had this embargo recently on oil leaving Venezuela and an air and shipping blockade that's been carried out by the United States. So the challenge right now is, having removed the leadership of Venezuela, Donald Trump is kind of stepping back and saying our key priorities right now, his statement recently, it's not the human rights issue and the release of political prisoners, it's sorting out the oil economy. Another statement today saying it's the absolute priority right now is for Venezuelans to return to Venezuela from the United States, Venezuelan migrants. So what the US is essentially doing is putting in action a train of kind of policy and strategic directions. But until we can get into Venezuela, food, imports, medication and security over the next couple of days, this is going to be quite a fragile situation.
Right. And the opposition leader, the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, does anybody know where she is?
She had gone to Norway to collect the Nobel Peace Prize, but really hasn't been seen since. It was reported that she'd been injured in this effort to get out of Venezuela and get to Norway. So
and that was presumably facilitated by the US, was it?
Well, we assume so, because otherwise she would have run the risk of being bombed by the US, given that she was going in a boat through the Caribbean. So that would have had to have been coordinated with the US, absolutely. The US has killed 115 people in the Caribbean recently in small boat bombings, so she would have had to notify.
At that point, then, you assumed that the US administration were betting on her, and then they changed their mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, clearly the FIFA Peace Prize winning president has triumphed over the Nobel Peace Prize winning president. So this is a real Peace Prize trade-off right now. The way Maria Corina Machado has been treated has really, taken quite a few people by surprise here. But what Trump is calculating, if he had taken Maria Corina Machado, into Venezuela, leveraged back into power, there would have had to have been very, very substantial US support in order to secure Maria Corina Machado, basically. And Trump's basically not willing to do that. This is a purely transactional operation. It's about access to oil in the economy. And if he can make a deal with the existing Venezuelan government, Maduro's vice president, that's the direction he's going to go.
Now, you've mentioned oil. It's obviously behind all this. I'm constantly reading that Venezuela has the largest crude oil reserves on the planet. What does that mean?
It means it's got 300 billion barrels worth of oil, mainly concentrated in its Orinoco Basin. But the real problem for Venezuela is that its oil is a very, very heavy crude mix. It's incredibly expensive to get out of the ground. And right now we have a glut in terms of oil supply on international markets. So, Trump is really pushing this idea that oil is going to be the motor of Venezuela's economic development. But frankly, investment in Venezuela's oil sector right now is not an attractive proposition.
Because the situation is so unstable?
Well, because the oil infrastructure is going to need so much investment, it's going to require a long-term commitment from oil companies. And frankly, oil companies have far better environments to be operating in than Venezuela right now.
So the narco-terrorism charges that Maduro is facing at around about 5 o'clock our time, how significant is that? And what about the involvement of the state of Venezuela in the illegal drug trade impacting the states?
OK, well, we're much looking forward to hearing the evidence which is going to be presented against Nicolas Maduro. My personal view is that we've had this kind of framework of Maduro as a narco-terrorist created in order to justify US intervention. They can do this on the basis that this is taking out a terrorist involved in the drug trade. The reality is infinitely more complicated, and this is the danger of the US position. Venezuela has really negligible amounts of cocaine flowing through the country. It lives next door to the world's leading producer of cocaine, which is Colombia, but that cocaine transits to the US via the Pacific, traditionally through Colombia and up through Mexico. Fentanyl, the other great problem that the US has, a problem that first emerged within the US from the Sackler family and the whole OxyContin scandal there. Venezuela is not a producer of fentanyl. So really, Venezuela is marginal in the drug trade. We do hear that this regime is being propped up by narco funding. The reality is cocaine is at the lowest price in history. I mean, the price of cocaine is on the floor right now. It might be worth, £30,000 a kilo when it arrives here in the UK, but it's only worth £2,000 a kilo when it leaves Venezuela. It's not a lucrative commodity and it cannot sustain regimes.
Right. I mean, it's actually a fantastic time to be you, isn't it, Professor of Law and Justice Studies? You must, every day's Christmas Day for you at the moment, because, what's going to happen in terms of China and Taiwan and obviously Zelensky's future as the president of Ukraine? What will Putin be thinking right now? This is such a complicated picture, isn't it?
Oh, it really is. But I think what's been quite interesting, there's been a lot of suggestions and concerns that this sets a precedent for China, as you suggested, to take some kind of action in Taiwan, and similarly with Russia in the Ukraine. I actually think China is an infinitely more sophisticated actor than that. And what China's doing right now is positioning itself in some respects as a champion of the international rule of law, and highlighting how the US is really violating these standards. They call for Maduro to be released. They've been very, very clear that they are leaning into international law here in demanding the territorial integrity of Venezuela. So there's a dangerous precedent been set, but I would argue it's a precedent that really is one very much for the United States, and we might see replicated in other countries.
And I'm just looking at images on the screens here of the UN Security Council meeting on Venezuela. Do you think that will achieve anything?
It will probably just result in a condemnation of US actions, but the UN Security Council really has been very, very ineffective in some of the most terrible and heart-wrenching crises of our modern times. So we can't really expect anything. Obviously, the US has a veto on the UN Security Council, so there'll be condemnation, but very little will come out from that body.
And how do you think the government in Denmark is feeling right now in terms of the future of Greenland?
I imagine that Denmark is probably feeling rather alienated from its NATO allies and very disappointed that countries like the UK and France haven't come out more strongly in defence of the basic principles of international law and the territorial integrity of nations. So a very, very worrying time for Denmark, for sure.
Thank you. That's Julia Buxton, Professor of Law and Justice Studies at Liverpool John Moores University.